The scripture reading this morning is John 4, verses 1 through 29 and verse 39. Now, when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard Jesus is making and baptizing more disciples than John, although it was not Jesus himself, but his disciples who baptized, he left Judea and started back to Galilee. But he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." His disciples had gone to the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it you, that a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Jews do not share things in common with the Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water, gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You're right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You will worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who is speaking to you." Just then his disciples came. They were astonished that he was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" Many Samaritans from that city believed in him because of the woman's testimony. "He told me everything I've ever done."
Living water. It's kind of a strange phrase, isn't it? What is this living water that Jesus offers this woman at the well? Well, later in John's gospel, Jesus will say that the life he offers is abundant life. Now, we often like to talk about the eternal element of abundant life. In fact, it is a relevant topic for a congregation that has lost as many members in the last few years as we have. In fact, when I originally started planning a service on this 2 years ago, we had just lost one of our oldest members, Vera Kennel. And with Vera, we got to see a particularly long example of what it means to have drunk from the well that gives abundant life. And no, I don't mean that Jesus' living water is the key to living for 103 years in this world. I mean that we could see abundant life in the joy and laughter she shared with us right up into the end, when we talked with her right here in church or visited her. Across all those years, and I know not all of them were easy, but even in those last years, Her life reflected an abundance of so many things that really matter, didn't it? An abundance of family who loved her and who she loved back. An abundance of that relaxed confidence you just sense in someone who is totally assured that they are known by God. An abundance of joy for still getting to know new people, a new pastor, for instance, even after all those years of meeting new people. And the abundance of friendship that we know she shared with Olivine, a depth of mutual understanding that only two centenarians who have known each other for their entire lives could hold. By the way, Olivine turns 106 on Tuesday, so get those birthday cards ready. But back to Vera. Even after 103 years, and even if she was moving physically a little bit more slowly, but I mean pretty impressively for 103, Vera's life struck me as a testament to a life that at its deepest levels was moving, was flowing, right to the end of her time in this world. Remembering Vera reminds me that living water and abundant living aren't only things that we need to grit our teeth and wait to enjoy until after we die. Because as N.T. Wright puts it, the point of Jesus' work is precisely to bring the life of heaven to earth. With the woman at the well in John 4, we get the sense that she has only begun to find out what that might all mean for her. But even in her early experience of it in this story, we get some glimpses of what living water means for her in the context of Jesus bringing heaven to earth. We see the here and nowness of living water, for example, in her excitement for truly feeling known in this world. For someone here and now acknowledging her for who she is, as she runs around telling anyone who listen regarding Jesus, and she does it more than once, come and see a man who has told me everything I've ever done. We see the here and nowness of living water in the phrase living water itself, in that this phrase that we usually translate into English as living water would have also been the phrase that people in Jesus' time would have used to simply mean running water. So we get an image of a kind of water that helps us to get moving again, spiritually and emotionally, even if not always physically, when our lives feel like they have become stagnant. We get a sense of life moving again as we see the woman spring up and run to tell others, easily a symbol of her coming alive in other ways too. And of course, it's true, isn't it, that even in the here and now, we need far more than just have our physical needs met, our thirst quenched, our hunger satiated. In the here and now, not just in some by and by, we need to know that we are truly known for who we are. And when we often find our lives feeling stagnant, in need of something to bring us alive again, we need something to get our blood pumping and our water running again, if you will. And so, it's with these thoughts in mind that I've wondered, though some of our matriarchs, like Vera, are no longer here to testify to us about how they have known Jesus' living water, their legacy lives on among us, especially among those who, like the woman in John 4, have responded to Jesus by going out in the world to help that living water to reach more and more people who are thirsty for it. The legacy lives on among those who have worked to carry water, if you will, to those who might be longing to be seen and known. The legacy lives on among those who have carried water to those who live lives that have come to feel stagnant in some way and who long for it to get flowing again. So I've wondered, what specifically would some of our women who have lived and worked in situations that have exposed them to unique ways of experiencing, sharing, and seeing living water in this world, what might they have to say about all this? What has Jesus shown them about living water through their experiences? What does Jesus' living water mean to them? What might their conversation look like if, say, they met around a well to discuss it?
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are things going?
Hanging in there.
About all we can expect to do, isn't it?
It is.
You know, I miss having Jill. We usually meet her on the path. I hear they're having some sickness problems.
Some of that COVID going around. It's hard to get the water from the Zoom screen.
Right. Well, Marguerite, I'm glad we're just pretending that we have to haul this water. I was thinking, well, I've had a long time to think about this. It's been like over 2 years. But I've been thinking a lot about carrying water, hauling water. And I mean, I had the chance. I lived as a kid in Puerto Rico. We had running water, but most people in our village, neighborhood didn't have it. Then we lived in Pakistan, then we lived in Nepal. And I always found that one of my favorite places in those countries to hang out was down at the well or at the water pump where women were getting water. And I don't know how it happened, but in all of those places, it's women's job to haul water. Mm-hmm. Did you see that in Botswana when you lived there?
I did, and I have specific memories of the water on the head, which was always marveling to me, right?
Yeah, I weighed that one. I mean, this is from Pakistan, and this is a classic. I mean, this is the typical water jug, and I weighed it this morning without water in it. It weighed 7.5 pounds, and it's a 5-gallon container. And my water resource engineering husband tells me that water weighs over 8 pounds a gallon, so that's like close to 50 pounds. And I would see little girls that were carrying water like that on their head, on their hip. And someplace I've got a picture, and I couldn't find it, but I've got a picture I took in India of 3 water containers on top of a woman's head, and she's got a baby in her arms. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a great compassion for, and a great kind of identification, although I never had to haul water, and I'm glad I never had to, but with women who hung out around the well. And that story of Jesus meeting that woman there, and I think it's so interesting. The Bible says he came at noon, and in my experience, women go early in the morning before the hot sun, and so they can have food, water to cook with and to clean with and do the laundry. And I bet Jesus wasn't planning on meeting anybody there.
So you think he was showing up at a time that he thought no one would be there?
Yeah. And so I think that surprise encounter with this woman is real fortuitous. I think that I'm glad it happened.
I've been thinking more about the less literal water and more about the living water, like Peter talked about, our human experiences on earth and how we can experience that living water by being seen and by seeing one another for who we are. Mm-hmm. I remembered a lot, one of the stories that I heard a woman tell as she was reflecting on her time in at Family Building Blocks, receiving services from our program. And she talked about how in every one of her interactions with, whether it was a one-on-one interaction with one of our staff coming to her home, or if it was coming to an event that for families that we would hold, she talked about how every single interaction she would be greeted with someone looking her in the eye and saying, "I am so happy to see you. I'm so glad you're here." And for her, someone who was struggling with everything in life, with feeling good enough, with feeling invisible, with feeling vulnerable, for her, that was life-giving. So when I think about living water in the here and now, those are the kinds of things that I think of. And I think that's such an opportunity that's so readily apparent in daily life. There's so many opportunities for that kind of connection and water sharing among us.
That's interesting because we so often, well, at least I, so often think of living water only coming from Jesus, that Jesus is the only one who can give living water. But when you talk about that experience and that woman's experience, it sounds like we can all be sources of living, life-giving water.
I really think that's true.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about I think there are these kind of iconic, uncomfortable situations that we all have found ourselves in, where we're in a public place, say a grocery store, and there's a parent and a child in some kind of an interaction that's not going well. And right, I remember the embarrassment at times of being a parent where a child might have been making a fuss and feeling like everybody's eyes are on you and it's embarrassing. And for everyone else in that space, it can be really uncomfortable. Everybody's aware of it, but looks away, and right, it's just awkward, it's annoying, it's hard. But I have come to challenge myself to see those as opportunities to engage, to see people, to connect. And I think that when we can find ways to do that, even in those kinds of situations, that can also be ways that we maybe give a glimpse of that living water.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting you say that you challenge yourself to see people. And that reminds me of what I so often have seen when I've worked in community trauma healing, which is what a lot of I've done with MCC, going in after a war or after a tsunami or after an earthquake or a flood. And I get the very strong sense that perhaps the greatest gift I can give is just to be a compassionate, empathic witness to their pain. And yeah, people need food and they need water and they need shelter and they need blankets. And on top of all of that, they need to know that they're not alone in their despair and in their trauma.
And the gift that you give in that situation is the gift of presence.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's something that all of us can do. We don't have to have degrees in social work or psychology, but yeah, that's a helpful point. And I was thinking about people that I know personally that just seem to be such good examples of fountains of living water. I think of my dear friend Olga, and Olga has given me permission to share this story. Olga is my age. She's a psychologist. We're about the same height. And our friends in Guatemala joke about we're the twins, we're the gemelas. But Olga has a fascinating story. She grew up in a family with 5 sisters, and she felt like she was the only one that was ugly. And that's the term she uses. She felt ugly, and because of that, she never wanted to participate in things outside of the house, and she skipped school as much as she could. And a very lovely young man from their village fell in love with Olga, and they got married, and they had a couple of children. But Olga was so depressed that she couldn't cook, she couldn't clean, she couldn't care for her children. And about this time, her husband, Jose Luis, ran into a couple of Mennonite Pax boys in Guatemala. And these Pax guys would spend the evening shooting baskets on the basketball court there in the town where they lived. And as Jose Luis got to know these Pax guys, they became good friends, and the Pax guys invited them to church. And Jose Luis became a believer. And he had this real burden for his wife, but he started sharing with people at the church how depressed Olga was. And the women in the church got their heads together, and they started showing up at her house. And they'd knock on the door, and she wouldn't come to the door. And in fact, a couple times she said she used to yell out from a window and say, "Go away, just leave me alone." And these women kept leaving these pots of black beans and rice for the family to eat. And eventually it's like, who are these people? I yell at them and they just keep showing up. The long story made a little bit shorter, is Olga became a believer, and her life was transformed as she found this community of living water. And Olga went to college, got her psychology degree. She's a graduate of Semilla, the Latin American seminary in Guatemala. She is the one who first invited us to do an international sister care. She is this force of nature now. She teaches at the seminary, and Olga is the one who comes to my mind as just oozing, gushing, living water. And it started with that just very consistent, unobtrusive, but loving presence that came in the form of rice and beans.
Persistent rice and beans.
Persistent rice and beans, right. And that's a country where they eat rice and beans every day. So yeah, it's exciting to think about Olga and how her life was transformed. And she never could have really understood the living water Jesus had to bring unless it was through the rice and beans of the people in that community. Yeah. You and I once had a conversation about shame and how shame is such a powerful force in so many people's lives.
And it sounds like that's, I'm guessing, part of what was at play for your friend Olga was shame and depression.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I think shame is, it's one of the emotions perhaps that we talk the least about, and it's perhaps one of the most debilitating and hard to talk about. But I think that just naming the fact that shame exists and we all experience it, and even those of us for whom it's not as debilitating perhaps as it was for your friend for all those years. But I think there, again, there's an opportunity to find for when we are seen for who we are and given the gift of knowing that that's enough,
Yeah.
that can help transform shame and be another form of living water.
As a therapist, I always found it really hard to work with someone who was paralyzed by shame. And it struck me that guilt is easy to deal with, but relatively easy. And guilt can be good. If someone has done something bad, feelings of guilt can be adaptive. They can say, oh, I don't like this feeling. This is telling me that something I did was wrong. But shame is harder to put our finger on because it's not, I did something bad. It's, I am bad.
It becomes part of the core of how we see ourselves.
Say it again?
It can become part of the core of how we see ourselves.
Right.
It's more like on our identity and who we are as opposed to something we've done.
And don't you suspect that the woman at the well, shame was a huge issue? I mean, who knows? We always assumed she was maybe a prostitute or a loose woman to have been married 5 times. I've lived in countries where if you couldn't produce a son for your husband, that was grounds for divorce. I've lived in several of those countries. And who knows? Maybe she was unable to bear children, or maybe she only gave girls. But whatever the reason, I think that Jesus probably quickly, with his loving presence, cut through that shame.
And said, I know you.
And said, I know you and I see you. Mm-hmm. I see you. Yeah. Somebody who pays attention to these things pointed out to me that conversation that we have, that Jesus had with the woman at the well, is the longest conversation recorded in the New Testament that Jesus had with anybody. And I like to think of her as, the first missionary. The first missionary. She's the one that Jesus, if I've got this right, first said, I am the Messiah. So Jesus not only saw her, but he revealed who he was. And she ran off back to the village and said, you've got to come see this man. So in my books, that makes her a missionary.
A missionary,
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's lots more we could talk about, and I hope we have a chance, maybe in a more private setting, Marguerite, to talk about these things some more. You know, this story in the New Testament and thinking of living water always reminds me of a song our mother's generation really liked, like The Woman at the Well. I bet Don could lead us in that.
Seems very fitting.